I had a question about people affecting other people's health and lives in general with their intent. So I've heard you explain that people can raise the probability of another person getting ill with their intent. And sometimes it's not just a voodoo practitioner trying to extort money. Sometimes it happens in a way that's not purposeful, simply because people are very upset and angry with each other in a relationship, after a big fight, for example. So that made me wonder, shouldn't we be seeing the effects of this type of thing on a larger scale in the world? So, for example, what about famous politicians who are intensely disliked by many millions of people? And among those millions, there are for sure many thousands who despise them to such an extent that they would want them to die or something. So with all of that negative, intense intent from thousands or even millions of people combined and focused on one single individual, shouldn't that individual just basically drop dead instantly?
No, there's a couple of reasons why that you shouldn't expect that individual just to drop dead. One is that you have more control over the probabilities that affect you, your health, your life, your longevity. You have more control over that than does anybody else. For instance, if you're helping someone, if you're trying to cure someone of some disease or some ailment they have, but that's an ailment that they need to have. It's part of their experience dealing with that ailment. You will try to heal them and it just won't work. You know, you'll put that and you'll push and you'll push and you'll try to heal them and it just doesn't seem to work. Those black spots just keep reappearing. Well, that's them pushing back. Now, if you are strong enough and they're weak enough, you can overcome them, but you can't overcome them 24/7, week after week. Eventually, you subsist and they persist and it all comes back and, the illness comes right back or another one will jump in its place. So the person has more power over those probabilities that affect themselves. Their own choices count more, are weighted much more heavily than are other people's choices. Okay, so that's one thing. But you might say, yeah, but there's millions of people who hate this person, Well, that's true. And if each one is only a fraction, still there's an awful lot of fractions to add up there. But what happens then is that person, that politician you're talking about that is hated, he's also loved and looked up to by a certain number of people as well. He's not everybody hates him. There's other people. And what he does is he feels that negativity. He feels that negative stuff from all those people. But he doesn't feel it in a way of, oh no, those people dislike me and that makes me feel bad. He feels it in a way, oh, those people dislike me and I'll show them. In other words, he takes that energy and turns it around into something positive for him. Positive, you might even say positive for his negativity. Makes him double down on his control and on the pressure and maybe even on his meanness or his nastiness. So he takes that negativity and it makes him want to push back harder, to punish those that are negative toward him, that sort of thing. And in that negative viewpoint, that is actually pushing him deeper into dysfunction than it is helping. So if you have a lot of negative attitudes towards somebody, you may just be pushing them deeper into their negativity. Now, when millions of people dislike somebody, most of them are not sitting around saying, die, die, die. Mostly they're just very unfocused. They just dislike and have strong dislike, and they feel all that strong dislike, but it doesn't really manifest into something that's real focused, like on health. Oh, have a heart attack. Now, if all 1 million of them were focusing on having a heart attack. And if they all were competent meditators and knew how to focus their intent and so on, that might be a different story, that to have that many people. But basically, their dislike is very diffuse and very general and not real focused. And they're not generally, the population aren't really competent meditators, so their focus is poor, their intent is fuzzy, and he receives it, and it gives him some strength in the sense that he pulls strength out of their opposition to him. He fights back even harder. He pushes back. And part of his own mastery over, or part of his modifying his own future probability, is that he will succeed. In his mind, I will succeed. I will beat these people. I will show them, if they dislike me, I'm just going to destroy them. So he's got all of this positive stuff, all the hard and awful things he's going to do. And in his mind, part of that is that he needs to stay healthy, and he needs to stay fit, and he needs to stay strong, and he needs to stay powerful. And he's got all that energy into being strong and powerful. He's the stronger influence there. And they may actually just be adding to his strength of purpose by being negative. So if they were all very focused and had a precise, well-focused intent, I think it would maybe be a different outcome. But even then, if he is strongly focused on the outcome, which is to succeed and dominate, well, that requires health to succeed and dominate. So part of that very strong focus, his strong focus is going to override their focus, even though there's lots of them, because you have more, your weight, your ability to modify future probability has a much higher weight to it when it's about yourself than it does if it's somebody else about you, which is why the voodoo people try to frighten their victim first. They do that because if the person's frightened, then it's much easier for them to bother him, because his fear now is on their side. But this dictator, or whoever he is, the politician, he's not afraid of those people. Matter of fact, he revels in it, in his dislike, in those people who hate him. He glories in it. He must be doing something right if all those people hate him, and they're going to hate him even more, when he dominates them. I think that's what's going on. But it's not just that anybody can make you sick is equal to you in making yourself healthy. It's not quite like that. Your own thoughts, your own energy. Now, most people who are being very negative, most people who are being negative enough to be hated by millions of people, have very strong intents. They're not just your everyday person that sits around and things happen and things don't, and they're very open to anything. They usually have very, very strong personalities, very strong intents, very intense viewpoint of where they're going and how they're going to get there. And with that kind of intensity, they're hard to knock off their purpose unless you can frighten them. If you frighten them to where they go, oh no, this is going to get me, well, now you can start putting energy into that fear. And then you have a hold of them. But they'll have no fear. They're in charge, they're powerful, and they're going to dominate everyone. And with that kind of strength of purpose and intent, then they stay healthy. They don't just drop dead because a million people don't like them. So I think the key thing that you're missing there is that everybody's intent is not of equal force. There's different weights depending on who's doing what to who. Now, if you have something that is not personal, let's say something that's just a part of the environment, like, is it going to rain next Saturday? Now, if you have, a bunch of people say, yes, I want rain, a bunch of people say, no, I don't want rain, then it's a matter of who has the bigger pull. Where where the force is, or maybe it'll rain half a day and then the sun will shine the other half of the day, you know, however that works itself out. Then it is pretty much a power, who's most powerful, pushing and pulling, because there isn't any big focused intent to rain or not rain. Rain's just rain. It's just whether it happens or not. There's uncertainty. But within somebody who's a powerful politician, he's got a lot of focus and power of where he's going. And he has a lot of other people supporting him who expect to be positively fed by that power and control, because they have a lot of positive focus in that succeeding as well. And it's interesting to notice that when you have powerful people like that, they often keep around them a group of, what can we say, a group of people who agree with them. When you have somebody like that, they'll surround themselves with a bunch of people who are not necessarily competent at anything other than the fact that they are good at sucking up and giving their power to that other person. And they surround themselves with people like that because they take that, also feeds their ego and feeds their power, as does their opposition. Their opposition also feeds their ego and feeds their power. So they take everything and feed it into their dominance, whether it's negative or positive, because that's where their focus is. So they basically are hard to turn around. Now, the way that you deal with people like that, though, is if you go to them and in their mind appeal to some part of them that cares about something, you know, find something that they do care about and work with that, you're much better than if you just want to override them with negativity. In other words, if let's say they're a politician and they have an interest in what history will say about them, you know, and if that's something that they really care about, they want to be seen as the great leader, and they don't want to be seen as the miserable dictator who made everybody miserable. They want to see themselves as a great leader. Well, that may be a chink in their negativity, that you could work on that idea and help change their mind, because you find that little chink in their armor where they do care about something. They care about their legacy, or they care about, you know, something else. But so it depends on the person you're working with. But it's much better to find that chink in the armor and try to pry that crack open than it is just trying to bash the armor with a heavier hammer in dealing with those sorts of people. But then all that takes very precise work. That's not just feeling negative to somebody. So that's why that works. That's why voodoo people try to scare their victim first, because if they don't scare their victim and their victim just says, I don't believe in that crap, you know, they're not going to do anything to me, then basically they reject it. It's just like you have, this is really a network, very much like the internet. You can turn off channels that you don't like. So if you don't like certain kinds of inputs, you can just turn them off, and then they don't affect you. So that's what is happening when that person who looks at the voodoo people and says, oh, go away, you guys are silly. You can't do anything to me. And they stay strong. Now, if that's a person that has a strong attitude and a strong input, they know where they're going and they know when to get there, and everything else they push aside, the voodoo people probably can't bother them. Oh, maybe it'll give them a little bit of irritation or anxiety, but it won't really hurt them very much because they've refused to connect to that energy. So you have an ability to turn off the things you don't like. Or you can take the things you don't like and turn them around to actually aid you in your process, you know, make you even want to dominate them even more and be meaner and be, you know, less kind to people. So it's not just as simple as everybody having equal force of changing probability in the future for themselves or for anybody else. It's a more complex process than that.
Thank you. That makes a lot of sense. Thank you, Tom.